Welcome, Erin, to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Very excited to have you here. You're a new-to-me author, and I just finished reading Clean Break, which I have to tell you I adored so much. I'm reviewing it right before we get into the interview segment. I'll have reviewed it to kind of tell everybody about it.
Yay, thank you.
It is the second book in your Farm College series. So before we dive into Clean Break, tell us more about what the Farm College series is about.
Okay, so it's just two books so far, like you said, and they are set in a fictional college in Western Oklahoma. And I would say kind of the overarching themes are, since they're college stories, they're new adult, it's kind of coming of age and self-discovery, finding your authentic self, finding a home is kind of a big one. I think that's kind of important at that age. You've moved out of your parents' house or wherever you grew up for a lot of people, and kind of figuring out what is home, what is family, that kind of thing. So those types of themes are kind of follow both books. They're both kind of angsty, to be honest, though Controlled Burn more so than Clean Break, actually.
Oh, my
so
goodness.
Be prepared. But yeah, and I think in terms of the setting is really important to me, at least as the author in those books. It was important to me. I'm from Oklahoma. I live in Alaska now, but I'm from Oklahoma. And it's important to me to write stories that are set in Oklahoma that have, LGBTQIA plus characters in Oklahoma. And I know as somebody that reads a lot of romance, I don't see that very often. I don't see romance set there, or it might be, I have seen it where it's, characters that are like escaping Oklahoma, which certainly is the case for a lot of people. But it's also the case that people live and love and make their lives there. And I kind of want to show that.
Does a farm college like this exist in Oklahoma? Is it based on a real place?
No, kind of, I guess. A lot of the kind of small details mirror Oklahoma State, which was my alma mater for undergrad. But Oklahoma State is much bigger than the college that I've created. Farm College is kind of a smaller college in Western Oklahoma that I've created. But in terms of being, having a strong agriculture program, but also kind of having this liberal arts situation that's going on in a pretty vibrant LGBTQIA community, I've kind of made most of that up. So...
And I agree that we don't see, besides books set in Oklahoma, really the more rural settings, it's always escaping from those places. And I like that you kind of built a place as if this is what you'd like to see, even if it doesn't quite exist there now.
Right. And I think it's kind of funny when I started writing Controlled Burn, it was pre-2016, right? And I kind of had this, idea that it's getting better, right? It's looking up for lots of communities. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case anymore. I hope it will be, and I hope it is eventually. But, there's good and bad, I think, about places like Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma is really special to me. It's really important to me. Kansas, the same. But there's also problems. And I want to kind of write those stories. Mm-hmm. And I also think thinking about Oklahoma or Texas, probably more so, a lot of the romances that I've read that are set there are like ranch, the cowboys, the farmers, which there is kind of a farmer in Clean Break, but there's a lot of people that live in Oklahoma and in Texas and Kansas that aren't cowboys. So I wanted to tell that story too.
Right. And you really hint at that a little bit with some of the dialogue between Travis and Connor in Clean Break too, as they kind of talk about the difference between cowboy and the more of the farmer type that Connor and his family are.
Right.
And so as we kind of move this direction, tell us what Clean Break's about and kind of who Travis and Connor are.
Right. So Clean Break is about Travis and Connor. Travis is he's the best friend in Controlled Burn. So if you've read Controlled Burn, you see quite a bit of him. He's an English major. He's from Houston, Texas. Very ambitious. He's got these kind of life plans, and nothing's going to slow him down, right? He wants to go to law school. He's got an internship after for the summer. He's planning to move to St. Louis eventually to work at this legal aid charity. He has this very, set goals. And he's also kind of a unique, quirky, funny character to me. And then you have Connor, who comes in, and I don't know if I would say at the beginning of the book, it's more like pre-book, before the book happens. They have a little bit of a failed hookup in a lot of ways, some misunderstandings, and so they don't like each other very much. And then in the first chapter, they get paired together as class partners in a class. And Connor is a farm boy. He's kind of a townie, right? He's from Elkville, which is the city that it's set in. He's expected to take over the family farm. And so he's got this, his future plans are set, right? He doesn't have a say over them. And I have a big soft spot in my heart for him. He's got anxiety. He has OCD. I really wanted to kind of write against the archetype of the lackadaisical cowboy, or even like the kind of the hard cowboy, or that kind of archetype that I had in my head. I wanted to write a sensitive farm boy who's in therapy and doesn't really match some of the people that, or the characters that I have seen written that way. And kind of the main issue between them, first, is that they don't like each other, but they're attracted to each other, right? But the kind of the main two things that I wanted to do with the book is I wanted to write complex, authentic characters that are really well-rounded, and hopefully I accomplished that. And then the other thing that I really wanted to do was kind of write two people that are heading towards their future, which is graduation, and then, the future beyond, and then their futures don't mesh. There's not really a way to come together at the end of graduation. They're moving in different directions. And I think that's a really universal thing for people in college that are dating seriously. Compromise your future for somebody else? Do you change it? How do you make it work? So those are kind of the two things that I really wanted to hit on. And of course there's there's some kink that happens in the book, and kind of self-discovery with that, especially on Connor's part. So there's a lot going on, but those two things, the characterization and the conflict there with their futures not meshing, are the two things I really wanted to hit.
And I think you did them both, really well. This book has so much going on in it, and yet the story also never gets weighed down either with the weight of everything that's kind of moving around here. And really starting them off as enemies who sort of move to friends to sort of get to lovers.
Right.
Just that progression was so fun to watch unfold as they both pick at each other and then also help each other grow at the same time. It's like they lift each other up and kind of tear each other down at the same time. Right.
And I hope that is realistic. I think people, because in a lot of ways they are kind of mean to each other at certain points, and people can be mean to each other in real life, especially they're not very old, they're 21, 22. So they kind of make stupid mistakes sometimes and say things that can be hurtful, and then have to figure out how to make it better.
Mm-hmm. And I think with Connor too, you talked about writing against the archetypes and just having kind of the anxiety plus the OCD, and being, a young gay man in that setting really just sets up so much for him in that situation.
Right. Yeah. He has a lot going on. He's bi, actually. And,
right. I'm sorry. You're right. Yes.
And so, kind of a lot. It is a lot. And I think it's a lot for him to kind of deal with all at the same time.
What was your research on the mental health side of it to kind of figure out what traits to weave into his personality?
So I did a lot of research, and I had some readers too that read it for me. One of the main things that I really looked at was kind of the myths, especially with OCD, kind of the myths surrounding OCD. I think a lot of people think it's just, a cleanliness thing or even an organizational thing where people with OCD have an impulse to organize or clean. And that's not really how it presents for a lot of people. A lot of people have intrusive thoughts, which he has. Or they have checking, where he checks the expiration dates on food, and he can't kind of stop doing that, even though he knows he shouldn't be doing it and it's not healthy for him to do. And so I did a lot of research about the myths and the different ways that it presents for people and kind of the hardships that it causes them. And I also really wanted to make sure that I kind of made it clear it's something that he'll always deal with, right? It's not going away. And so it's really, I did a lot of research on how to manage it, how to kind of continue life dealing with a mental health problem like that.
Yeah, so often I wanted to just give him a hug when he was starting to lapse into it. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. This is happening. What you did through the black moments, and I don't want to give spoilers for folks who need to read the book, but what you did through the black moments for both Connor and Travis as they dealt with their emotions, and for Connor how those emotions kind of manifest themselves in his OCD was really just, I really liked seeing two young adults kind of come to grapple with all of that.
Yeah, and I think I think it's pretty normal when you're more stressed, right? For when there's more and more stress for, the OCD to kind of build on itself. The same with anxiety. Like whenever I'm really stressed about stuff, my anxiety is going to be worse about small things, that you can kind of blow them out of proportion. I know I do that. And so I was kind of trying to show that how it's like, as things got more stressful for him with graduation looming and with kind of this relationship with Travis that's not going the way he wants it to go, it does kind of snowball for him. And it kind of snowballs for Travis too, just in different ways. Because he doesn't have anxiety or OCD, of course, but, he struggles just kind of the same way.
Now, when you were talking about what this book's about, you left out one of its major points.
The bugs
was the inclusion of the hissing cockroaches.
Yeah.
Where did that idea even come from?
So, I knew I wanted to put them in a class together, that I wanted them to be class partners. And, but Travis is an English major and Connor is agriculture sciences, agribusiness major. And so I knew it had to be like a gen ed class for at least one of them. And so I really started thinking about the gen ed classes that I had taken as an English major whenever I was in undergrad, trying to figure out what class would make sense. And then I realized that I actually had taken an ag class that was Entomology 101. And I loved it. I held like tarantulas and I held millipedes, and I could see myself being that like weird bug girl a little bit. I just loved it. And so that's kind of how I decided to put them in an entomology class. And it's funny because I do think that college is one of those times to take the weird class and do the weird thing. And so I think it kind of made sense there. And I also felt like it gave a degree of kind of humor and lightness. I thought it would to the story, but I realize now that a lot of readers maybe don't like bugs. So it's something that's like a little distressing to some people. When I took the entomology class, we had an assignment where we had that exact assignment with the Madagascar hissing cockroaches. And where we had to take him home and observe him. And so, for an entire semester, I had a Madagascar hissing cockroach in my dorm room with me. I never took it out of its box. I fed it like carrots through the little hole that it couldn't get out of. And so I thought it would be fun to put that in this story. And I can tell you that for the readers, the cockroaches do not escape ever. There's no unexpected cockroach scenes, I promise.
Yeah. And I can vouch for that. There are no unexpected scenes. And in fact, I had to ask about that before I took the book on to read.
I
know. Bugs. I don't know about that.
I know. I have put it in the trigger warnings for the book, and on my website, it really does lay out kind of scene by scene where they're at and kind of the degree that they're on the page. And they're not on the page that much. No,
they're not. And I never got squirmy reading it either, because I really don't like bugs. And I was totally fine with how this turned out. So
yeah, I know. I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me that it would gross people out. At that point, it was too late when it finally hit me. I was like, well, can't do anything about it. But I kind of thought they were funny.
Well, I think it really fits with the whole ag culture of the college, that of course they're going to end up with bugs or whatever and have to learn about them. So
right,
it all meshed in together. And like you said, there's no point where they're escaping or being gross. They're just kind of there.
Right.
I likened it to those classes sometimes you take in high school where you're having to take care of the doll for a week or whatever, and in this case you're hanging out with a cockroach. So. Right.
It's kind of like a little pet for them for the semester.
So is there more planned for the Farm College series?
I have not kind of set plans. I do want to write a story for Alex. He's in both books. He's not in Controlled Burn for very much, though his part is kind of important in Controlled Burn. But he's a friend of Connor's, really, in Clean Break. And I do want to give him a story, and I will. I'll probably start writing that soon. Kind of beyond that, I don't know how much more I'll write in the Farm College series, so I do want to do a spinoff that's kind of several years in the future, so they're not really in college anymore, and I want to do an FF romance for Desi and Lena. So I would start there for them.
Yeah, I would totally read that book, because one of the things you did in Clean Break, and I'm sure you established it back in Controlled Burn too, was just the tight community of friends that Travis and Connor both have, and even the strong family presence of Connor's family and how they support him. So it would be great to see more of all of that.
Yeah, and I think I did that a little bit more successfully in Clean Break for sure, where they have very very supportive families, and they do have kind of a big, wide friend group. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you like that. But I do want to do the FF romance for Lena and Desi, kind of. But Lena is quite young in this book; she's 20, and so I want to give her a little bit of time to grow up, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, you've got another series out there called Love Life. And tell us a little bit about what goes on in that series.
Sure. So that's also, they're both male romances set in Oklahoma, eastern Oklahoma for the first book, Life on Pause. They're kind of small town romances. The first one is about a guy that works at a homestead, kind of prairie museum. They're kind of common in Oklahoma, where the people that work there have to dress in the historical costumes of the time. So he works at that type of museum, and then he is paired with a high school choir teacher. And it's kind of them trying to fall in love and figure out how their relationship will work. It's definitely kind of lighter in tone than the Farm College series, but is still a little angsty. The second book in the series, Life of Bliss, is more novella length. It's a little shorter, and it's very tropey. It's kind of two people that don't like each other very much, but are fooling around kind of behind their friends' backs. they agree to be fake boyfriends for a family wedding in Arkansas. And Arkansas kind of, well, it has this, historically in the area, it was the only state that didn't have a waiting period for marriage licenses. Now most of the states don't, but back in the day, you know, they made you like test for syphilis and all kinds of stuff that extended the marriage license period. So Arkansas was kind of the place where people would go for their shotgun weddings historically. And so this is going back quite a ways. But in this book, they go to a wedding in Arkansas. They get drunk at the wedding and basically end up getting married themselves. It's set in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, for the wedding part. And I don't know if anybody would be familiar with that, but you can get married practically anywhere in Eureka Springs. It's kind of an economy there. So it's quite easy to get married. And that's what happens. So it's kind of fake dating to accidental marriage.
Fake dating to accidental marriage. I like those are some favorite tropes right there.
Yeah. It's a fun one, I think.
So what is your writing origin story? You've got these 4 books out. How did all this start?
Well, I was a creative writing English major in undergrad, but then I ended up going to grad school for library and information studies. And I was a public librarian, and I had kind of had a lot of big changes in my life. I had just graduated grad school. I had just gotten married. I had just moved away from home, like all of these big changes. Had a full-time job for the first time. And I was living in Houston, Texas, and I had this horrible commute. It was like an hour and a half each way. Ooh. And
so I had pretty horrible.
I think most people that have been in Houston know what I'm talking about. And I had all this time to kind of think, and I basically, on my commute, started plotting a book. And some of it came from, I missed kind of the creative outlet of writing research papers and stuff like that from school. And so, that's kind of how I started writing, as I plotted this book on my commute. And then finally I decided that I was going to sit down and write it. And that book was Controlled Burn.
That's an awesome story.
Thank you.
What led you into putting this creativity towards romance amongst all of the genres that were possible?
Yeah. Some of it, I think, is that I was reading a lot of it at that time. I kind of got into romance, I guess, if we're going farther back, by reading Suzanne Brockman. Mm-hmm. Right. So she has the Troubleshooter series that has Jules Cassidy, who's the gay FBI agent, right? And he's got the kind of the secondary romance through several books, and then the primary through a novella. And then whenever I was in grad school, I kind of didn't have time to read for pleasure very much, and so I wasn't reading very much. And then I took a class about reader's advisory that we had to read like the books from the best books of the year for Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and stuff. And I just I can't remember what year it was, but I grabbed kind of a random book off the romance list. And it ended up being Brothers of the Wild North Sea by Harper Fox. And I didn't really realize that it was a male-male romance. I just kind of grabbed it and started reading it, and then it became quite clear, very early on that it was. And it's a beautiful book. Harper Fox, is a beautiful writer. Everything that she writes is really awesome. And so I kind of gobbled up everything that she had written, and then it kind of hit me at that time. There has to be other writers that are doing this, and they weren't the books that were in the libraries. They weren't in my libraries. So I kind of started searching them out and, read a lot of K. Mitchell and Z.A. Maxfield and some of those authors at that time that were the most prolific, and was just very excited because I felt like there were all these authors that I had never heard of, that I didn't know about, and they were all really, really good. And they were writing, stories that kind of the themes were very important to me. And so then whenever I eventually decide to sit down and write a book, I think probably the main thing for me is that I wanted to write characters who are LGBTQIA in Oklahoma. And just happened to be that the first book that kind of came to mind and that I plotted fully was an MM romance and control burn. So that's definitely how I got started.
That's very cool. And some great authors there to get you introduced to the genre as well. Who do you count as your author influences?
Well, definitely, my gateways were Suzanne Brockman into romance in general, and then Harper Fox. Kind of on a wider scale, I really like Alicia Rye. She writes the heroines that are the type of heroines that I just love. They're raunchy and rowdy, and wonderful. I would say also Annabeth Albert in terms of contemporary romance. Alexis Hall, I think, kind of teaches it, or his books are like a master class on first person point of view. If you look at For Real or Glitterland. And so I really, really like his books too.
Now, your bio mentions that you like binge-worthy TV shows. So, of course, we have to know, what are you binging these days or have binged recently that you would recommend?
So, my husband and I have been rewatching Game of Thrones, of course, because the last season's about to come out. But when you binge that show, you just kind of realize how many awful things happen back to back to back. And because the first time that we watched it, we didn't binge it. We were watching it week to week. But when you're binge watching it, it's like, oh my God, it's so awful, these things that keep happening. Other than that, I really I like true crime, but I'm not watching any kind of true crime right now. And I like comedies. So I've watched Schitt's Creek recently, which I love. The Good Place, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, One Day at a Time, all these sitcoms that I think are really good. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, because I love musicals, is really good. And then I also watch a lot of reality TV. So I like Tiny House Hunters and Instant Hotel and Project Runway, shows kind of like that.
Very cool. Yeah, some good stuff on there. Good Place is a particular favorite.
Yeah, it's so smart. It's so different than it's very, very unique.
Yeah, so this is a great list for anybody who's looking for something to binge this spring right here. So what's coming up next for you in your release plans?
So I don't have anything kind of set in stone. I'm not very good at planning. I have Tornado Chasers or Storm Chasers. That's a male romance that I have on submission right now to a publisher that I'm hoping will pick it up. If they don't, then, it'll keep going out and hopefully somebody else will want it. I'm currently writing a book about a rec league softball team. And I want those to be really, really tropey and kind of fun and light. The first one is using kind of the one bed trope. So I hope that will be a lot of fun. I'll write Alex's story pretty soon. And then I have a book that I wrote that I'm hoping to put out at Christmas. It's called Stocking Stuffers. And it's a MF romance with a bi heroine who sells sex toys. Like the Tupperware parties, but it's like the sex toy Tupperware parties kind of. And so she works for a company, kind of is the marketing person for a company like that. And she's hosting one of those parties, gets snowed in, with a big red bag of toys, basically. Yeah,
that'll make an interesting forced proximity story.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun to write.
And I'm very interested in the Storm Chasers too, because I'm kind of a weather geek at heart. So you kind of got me on that one.
It was a lot of fun to write. Growing up in Oklahoma, tornadoes are such a kind of a constant, really. I mean, my parents have lost a house in a tornado. I know lots of people that have lost houses in tornado. It's so common. It's just kind of a part of your life, especially if you're from central Oklahoma like me. And so it was a really fun one to write because you are just kind of entrenched in bad weather in Oklahoma in the spring all the time. So
very cool. And how can readers keep up with you online to keep track of all these projects?
So I have a Facebook group called Erin McLellan's Meet Cute. That's a good one if you I do giveaways and book recs and stuff. On Twitter, my handle is E McLellan Writes, and I'm on Twitter pretty often. On Instagram, it's Erin McLellan Writes, and on Instagram, I would say it's about 70% Alaska stuff, like every moose that I've ever seen, and then 30% books, unless there's a book release and then it flips. But it's a lot of Alaska if you follow me on Instagram. And then my newsletter, which you can get to on my website or through any of the social media too. You would be able to kind of find the link to my newsletter. And that's probably the best way if you just want to know about new releases or sales or things like that without having to kind of trudge through Twitter.
Well, fantastic. Well, I thank you so much for coming to talk to us about Clean Break, and wish you all the success on that one and the upcoming releases as well.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.